Well, it's time to begin. We're in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And Hebrews, the 11th chapter, is my favorite chapter in Hebrews. It's kind of nicknamed the Hall of Fame of the Faithful. And once again, I want to encourage everybody, if you have something to say, please participate. I encourage that in a Bible class. And we're kind of spread out, and so if you say something, I'll try to summarize it so it gets recorded and you can hear it over and see it over the internet. Now, in Hebrews, once again, the writer has a problem. And the problem is Jewish Christians are having second thoughts. Don't know if this is worth it. Maybe I should go back into Judaism, being a Jew, and do the Jewish customs and worshiping and slaughtering lambs and turtle doves. And he has this great idea, maybe their faith isn't what it's supposed to be. Maybe I need to encourage their faith to be better. And what other great idea you could have along with that is their forefathers. So the writer talks about 18 people in Hebrews, the 18th chapter, and let's talk about their faith. They had enough faith to overcome tremendous obstacles. And maybe that will help these first century Jewish Christians to realize they have a really great thing. Now, of these 18 people, it's kind of an interesting group of individuals. We have a prostitute that's mentioned with them. We have even a murderer talked about. Now, not saying that the murderer had great faith, but he is mentioned in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And these people are only from the Old Testament era. Nothing is said about people who had great faith in the New Testament era. I think that's interesting. So my question to you, and there's many, why do you think this writer of Hebrews talks about these specific people? Have you ever thought about that? Why in the world would he talk about Rahab, the harlot? Why would he talk about Abel, Moses, Abraham, all of these individuals? Why? Why do you think he talked about them? The Jews would know who they are. Exactly, Pam. And what set these individuals apart from all the millions of individuals in the Old Testament time was their faith. They believed in God with every ounce of fiber, with every breath that they would take. They believed in God. And what is so great about this great faith these people had? Well, it's a huge, huge item. And so let's start reading in verse 1. And we'll stop along the way, of course. In verse 1, now faith is the certainty of things hoped for, a proof of things not seen. And I'm reading from the New American Standard. Things not seen. But you still believe in them. So give me some examples of things that you believe in, but you can't see. Gravity, good one. You know it's there, but you can't see it. What are some other things? The wind. Have you read my notes yet? Oh, no, okay. Yeah, the wind. You can see the evidence because the leaves are blowing. You can feel the wind blowing, but you can't see the wind. What else? The air that you breathe. I've been going in and out with my lungs for 71 years, and I never have been able to see that oxygen. but I have faith that I'm breathing in oxygen. And has any one of us seen God? No. Now, we have seen the evidence that God has created this great, wonderful world. We see evidence, and because we have seen that evidence and we have read His Bible, we believe and have faith in God. Now, none of us have seen heaven, but we have the faith that it's there. None of us that I know of has seen angels. There's been some people in the Old Testament that saw angels, but we believe in angels even though we haven't seen them. We haven't seen electricity, but when you turn that light switch on, you know electricity is going through those wires. We see the evidence of these things even though we cannot see them. And the same principle holds true with us with God. Verse 2. For by it the people of old gained approval. So in other words, because of these people in the Old Testament had this tremendous faith, they're looked up to. They're appreciated. By faith, we understand that the world has been created by the Word of God. And sometimes we overlook that little phrase. God spoke it into existence. He wasn't out there with a hammer and a saw. He spoke it into existence, which is just amazing. So that what is seen has not been made out of things that are visible. Some people today don't believe God created the world. And it just all came about because of evolution. No. God spoke it into existence. Now, then we start talking about people in verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Now, if you remember, Cain is the one that killed Abel. But Abel had a better sacrifice. What did he sacrifice? Animals. What did Cain sacrifice? The harvest, the fruit, the grains, vegetables, whatever. But Abel somehow, some way knew that God would want a sacrifice of that type, through which he was attested to be righteous. God testified about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. Even though he is dead, what he did still lives on. That's going to happen to you and me. Someday, I'm going to be dead and gone. But the things that I spoke in sermons, Bible classes, and the way I lived, hopefully, my grandkids and my children will say, yeah, he was a pretty good guy. And that's going to happen to each and every one of us. Then in verse 5, we go to another individual. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. And he was not found because God took him up. For before he was taken up, he was attested to have been pleasing to God. Now, in Genesis, the 5th chapter, starting in verse 21, nothing is mentioned about his faith, but because it says that he walked with God, tells us that Enoch was pleasing to God. And the word for that in the Hebrew is to take. So Jesus took him. Why? Why did Jesus take Enoch? Because of his faith. He was pleasing to God. And you know, when you walk together in unity, that usually tells you that you're on the same pathway, the same length. Verse 6. And without faith, it is, excuse me, impossible to please Him. So God is expecting you to have this tremendous faith. For the one who comes to God must, emphasize must, believe that He exists and that He is proves to be the one who rewards those who seek Him. Back in the 60s, you remember there was a lot of publicity about God is dead. Well, how crazy that is, and how 180-degree that is from what verse 6 says. Then we come to another person that we probably can relate to a little bit more because we've studied him and we talked about him more than Enoch and some of the others. By faith, Noah. What did Noah do with his faith? Yes. What else did he do? What? He preached? Yeah. We have no history of any rain before the time of the flood. There could have been. We just don't know. It's not recorded in the Bible. And so Noah preached for almost 100 years, I believe it was, that God is going to destroy the world with flood. And so Noah is building this ark, and what happens? Starts to rain. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not seen, which is the flood, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. It took a lot of faith, in my opinion, for Noah to build an ark, a boat, in dry land. And can you imagine the ridicule Noah got, and people walking by laughing at him and saying, "Oh, what's a flood anyway?" But it did. I'll tell you a funny little story about Noah's Ark. Debbie and I went down to Branson, and we saw, I think it was Branson, they put on a big production of Noah. And so in this production, and they take some leeways about it, but it was so funny when they were putting all these animals, mostly 2 by 2, into the ark, and then they came to the skunks. And the audience those skunks, they were trained, and they just pitter-pattered right up the gangplank. And anyway, it was just real funny to see that. So obviously you guys aren't laughing, so never mind. Verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place where he was to receive an inheritance, and he left not, knowing where he was going. And in Genesis, the 15th chapter, verse 6, just kind of adding to that, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Can you imagine his wife, Sarah, talking to Abraham, or Abram, and says, "Now wait a second. We're going where?" Well, that's a funny thing you should say that, Sarah, but I don't know where we're going. You're expecting me to uproot everything we've worked for and done and going to a place that you don't even know? Yeah. That's exactly what Abram did. By faith, he, being Abraham, lived as a stranger in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob for fellow heirs of the same promise. He was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is gone. Some commentators think that's Jerusalem, but I don't think so. I think it's more credible that he's looking for a heavenly home, which makes, to me, more sense. In Hebrews, the 12th chapter, verse 22, which Nathan will be talking next week, the apostle speaks of the heavenly Jerusalem. In Hebrews, the 13th chapter, verse 14, he says, Here have we no continuing city, but we seek one to come, which is heaven. Now, then we go to verse 11. And in verse 11, it talks about Sarah. By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive even beyond the proper time of life. How old was Sarah when she got pregnant? Yes, 90-year-old pregnant woman. Was that just coincidental? Not for a second. God had His hand in it. Since she considered Him faithful who had promised. She considered God, well, if God says I'm going to get pregnant, it's going to happen. She believed what God said. And that talks mountains of her faith. Therefore, even from one man, which was Abraham, and this is verse 12, and one who was as good as dead. Ooh, that's kind of harsh words about her husband. Basically, he was in human appearance, there was no probability that he could ever have a son, just looking at him. And then there were born descendants who were just as the stars of heaven in number and as innumerable as the grains of the sea along the seashore. So here we have Abraham. He looks like he's on his deathbed. He looks old and decrepit. Sarah probably did too to some degree. And he became the father of a great nation, and it's compared to the sands of the sea, which is unnumberable. That's amazing faith. And both of them had it. Comments or questions before we go on?
I was waiting for you to say that.
Okay.
Okay, my brain's always running when I'm listening to Bible stuff, and you done ran past the guy that built the ark.
Noah.
Thank you. I was going to say that when I thought of it. Okay, what I was thinking about is, first of all, that was a lot of time.
Yeah.
A long time. Can you imagine Noah's kids, how old they might have was when they started?
Mm-hmm.
The kids out here, the other kids had to be laughing at his kids.
Yep.
Because his daddy was crazy.
Yep.
Without-
Yep.
And so when you think of the torment, God took some really hard things.
Yep.
And I thought about Sarah. God could just make her pregnant, get her to get pregnant, well, what you could.
Yeah.
He had to wake up everything. She had to feed her baby
Yeah.
and catch it.
Yeah.
I could barely walk now.
Okay. Good points. Then let's drop down to verse 13. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen and welcomed them for a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth. And the word earth there in the Hebrew, in the Greek, it could have been, they could have used the word Canaan, but they didn't. The writer wanted to have a bigger expanse, and that's why I think the writer used the word earth. Verse 14, for those who say such things, make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. In other words, not a country of Israel, but a heavenly country. And they wanted this, they realized that this world is not our home. Now, I live at 2685 West Raleigh Road in Floyd Knobs, Indiana, and I'm living there, but that's not where I'm going to spend eternity. Where I'm spending eternity, hopefully, will be heaven. And that's the way we should think of it. Yeah, we have a house we live in, a bed we sleep in, but that's not where we're going to live throughout eternity. In verse 15, and indeed if they had been thinking of that country which they left, they would have had opportunity to return. You know, Abraham could have gone back to where he came from, but God told him to go somewhere else. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, what did he do with Isaac? When God tested Abraham, what did he want to do to Isaac? He was going to kill him. And Abram even had the knife apparently up in the air, and he was going to go down. And what happened? God stopped him. Now, it's interesting. Last Sunday I preached a sermon, and I used this as illustration, and now I have God's Son on the cross. And can you imagine? God could have stopped the crucifixion, but He didn't. He knew that He had to kill His Son as a sacrifice for our sins. Now, He stopped Abram, but He didn't stop from killing His Son. That's how much love God has for you and me. Okay. Verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and the one who had received the promises was offering up his only son. It was to whom he was said, though Isaac your descendants shall be named. He considered that God is able to raise people from the dead. So in the back of Abraham's mind, he was thinking, well, if I kill my son, if I sacrifice my son the way God wants to, God is all powerful. He can raise him from the dead. That's really what verse 19 is saying. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of his sons and Joseph and worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. He wanted his bones to be taken to the promised land. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the sons of Pharaoh. And there's another thing that Moses did that was tremendous amount of faith. What comes to your mind when he was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt? What did he do? He went through the Red Sea. Now, many times, we say this in Bible studies for little kids all the time, but that took a lot of faith because those waters could have just come crashing in on them and killed them all. It took a lot of faith for Moses to step out into that dry land between that water. Yes?
Well, I mean, think about what happened to Peter in a similar situation.
Yeah. And hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll get to that. Okay? So, moving along before we run out of time. So, Moses had a tremendous amount of faith, and he showed that by his actions. He kept the Passover. He went through the Red Sea. And then we come to the Promised Land. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. And the Israelites marched around it for 7 days. Who was the leader doing that? Joshua. Is Joshua mentioned in Hebrews 11? No, sir. And I think it's interesting that he's not mentioned. And we'll get to that later, hopefully. And then by faith, the prostitute Rahab in verse 31 did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. So here she is in this foreign land, and she's heard a lot of great things about the power of God and the power of Israelites, and so she helps them out. And because of that, and putting a scarlet thread in her window, her and her household were saved, but she had faith in doing that. And then in verse 32, I think this is interesting how the writer does this. For what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. And so these are the people that he wants to talk more about, but he doesn't because of time's sake. So very quickly, Gideon tore down his father's idols. That took a lot of faith. Barak was a fierce warrior with Deborah, and we don't really talk a whole lot about him. Samson, of course, you know the story of Samson and Delilah. A little surprising that he's in there because he killed so many people, the last thing that he did in his life. Jephthah is the one who made the rash vow and lost his daughter, most likely. And then they mention David in one word. Think of all the things that David accomplished and all the things that he was getting ready to build for the temple and all the land that he conquered, but the word David is the only thing that's mentioned about David, which is interesting. And then Samuel the prophet, and then let's drop down to verse 33, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouth of lions. There's a story about someone thrown into a well with lions. Who's that? Daniel? Daniel was not mentioned in Hebrews 11. He quenched the powers of fire, escaped the edge of the sword from weakness, and made strong, became mighty in war, but put foreign armies to flight. And then in verse 36, it says, okay, we have these 18 people that I'm mentioning, and it says, and others. It's kind of like a catch-all phrase. Now, I didn't mention this person, I didn't mention that person, but there were others that had great faith. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They were tempted. They were put to death with a sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. The people of whom this world was not worthy of. Tremendous people wandering in deserts, on mountains and shelters and caves and holes in the ground. And all these having gained approval through their faith and did not receive that promise yet. Because God has proven something better for us, so that apart from us they would not be made perfect. And the word there, better, means complete. Okay? Now, think about this for a while. Of Hebrews 11, who are some of the people in your mind who were left out? Okay, now you can say something. Job, good answer. Who else? Joshua was left out. What else? Mary and Joseph, but that's in the New Testament, and we're going to get to that in just a second, but good answer. Ruth. Ezra. Good answers. Who else? Oh, Esther. Okay. Who else? What about Daniel? I mean, he had tremendous faith to stand up to the king. And what about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? What about Isaiah? He had a tremendous faith in God. Elijah. And I even put Solomon in there, even though he kind of fell away at the end of his life. But he did amazing things in the beginning of his life. So there are a lot of other people that could go into Hebrews the 11th chapter. And that's why I think verse 36, when it says, and others, like Joshua, like Ezra, like Ruth. Now, change the subject just a little bit before the bell rings. Who in the New Testament would you put in Hebrews the 11th chapter? Mary and Joseph. Good answer. Who else? Anna. Okay, who else? Peter, Paul, Stephen. You have been reading my notes, I can tell. Who else? John. I put Paul, Stephen, John, Mary his mother, Joseph. I also put Mary Magdalene. Remember her? She had demon possession. Jesus healed her. up in Galilee area, and she followed him everywhere, even to the grave. Now, my question to you is, would you be in Hebrews the 11th chapter? I think some of you would be, because I think you have a lot of faith. And that's what we need today. Mary and Martha, good answer. Anybody else come to your mind? Huh? Cornelius, yeah, that's a good one. John the Baptist, excellent one. So there's a lot of people that had tremendous faith. And how much faith do you have today? Okay, any questions or comments before we close?
I remember.
Yes.
Before it go away again. What I not like about these, God asking people to do some incredibly hard things.
Yeah.
We really got it easy. Like Rahab, don't you come out of that house, you stay in that house, you're going to be saved. Can you imagine being on the wall and you hear all this loud noise, they falling all over the place, and you got to stay in that house?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Wow is right. Okay. Appreciate everybody's comments. And next Sunday, Nathan will take over Hebrews the 12th chapter, and then I'll finish the book the next week.